The next major move for XRP is going to shock you, but it's probably not going to be what you think. As 2025, we saw some of the greatest announcements in XRP and Ripple history. They won the lawsuit. We have a stable coin called RLUSD that was launched through Ripple. They spent $4 billion in acquisitions of adjacent companies to expand and grow their business model. And now Ripple has partnered with Gemini and MasterCard, stating that the future of payments is here. Then just last year, Ripple as a company was valued at close to $11 billion. There has been a lot of chatter surrounding the potential for an IPO on Ripple as they're getting close to now $40+ billion in evaluation. And that happened in a single year as $500 million was invested in Ripple by Fortress Investment Group and Citadel Securities. Ken Griffin, who is famously one of the market makers behind the whole 2021 GameStop and Robinhood debacle. That said, we'll be covering this article from Ripple and diving into how this is all going to play out into the future, considering they have almost every single key thing in place to dominate in the future of finance, and whether or not that's going to play a role in the price action for XRP moving forward, as even the RLUSD stablecoin continues to climb and grow in market cap and jumped almost $100 million in a single day from November 2nd to November 3rd. So we are in a strong uptrend for demand on the RLUSD stablecoin and will likely continue to grow even into a bear market with all sorts of other applications for stable coins like real world assets and traditional financial adoption. Virtually all banks in the future will be using stable coins for everything. And with those Ripple acquisitions, it looks like the RLUSD stablecoin will play a key role. But will that affect the XRP token? So I'll be diving into all of that alongside the price action and some on-chain analytics alongside open interest and liquidation, so we can get a better picture into what happens next for XRP, even in a situation where the macro looks really weak, but the news has been so bullish. And before we dive in, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, I Trust Capital, which helps us create value-based videos like this, and is one of the most trusted platforms for you to have a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and essentially allow you to invest in a boatload of different cryptos, which are self-managed, extremely low fees. And because IRAs and Roth IRAs are tax advantaged, this is one of the best ways in which a crypto investor can keep their money in the crypto market and plan for their retirement. Not only that, but there are extremely low transaction fees, no monthly or annual fees. There is no pressure for you to take advantage of any other products or services that they offer because no one on the team is actually commissioned, which means you're completely in control when you roll over a 401k or a Roth IRA into the I Trust Capital platform. And when you sign up with the link in the description or bio below, be sure to claim your $100 funding bonus by using the promo code BULLRUN9. Now let's dive into the video, folks. And as always, if you're feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the Bull Runners YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDeFi, PauliDeFi. A lot of people have been expecting XRP to do extremely well into the end of the year. Matter of fact, we were expecting crypto to do really well into the end of the year, considering November tends to be a really strong month, heck, even the end of October. But instead, all we got was a massive, arguably the largest liquidation event in history on the 10th, which acted as a good measure for a reset in leverage and would allow for the markets to potentially start to recover. But that's not what we've seen. And instead, from this massive liquidation event, the market rallied just slightly back up to 266 and then started dumping yet again for new local lows down to 207, which seems to be a pretty strong range of support. However, if this does break down, things are going to look pretty nasty. And so a lot of people in the community are quite confused about why this is happening when we have such positive developments in news on the Ripple front. And it's important to note, if you're new here or you've been involved in XRP for quite some time, at the end of the day, the Ripple company is completely separate from the XRP token. There are a lot of creative ways in which they could potentially build out the current infrastructure they have acquired through 6 different companies over the last 2 years into the XRP ledger, where XRP is the backbone and the token that you will use to transact for fees. But at the end of the day, these acquisitions are completely separate, as is the RLUSD stablecoin, which can be used on private ledgers they build for different banks, institutions, and even inside of any of these companies. They don't have to use the XRPL, although it would be to their benefit, considering the majority of that 40 billion XRP that is sitting in the escrow will eventually come into the market. And the real question is, will they want to sell it in order to do more acquisitions, or will they want to find creative ways to build out these companies inside of the XRPL, or maybe start to reposition some of these transactions on the XRPL that XRP might benefit from it? But still, when you see this much positive news for Ripple, it should affect the price of XRP and allow for it to pump to the upside. Because that is not happening, and because we're in a very weak macro outlook or an environment, this leads me to believe that the top for the year is actually in. And that's not something everyone wants to hear, but the price action is also telling the exact same story. So this is all great for the Ripple company, considering they are now valued at $40 billion. They've consistently been repurchasing 25% of their shares. But again, those shares are not XRP. They're buying shares of the Ripple company, which, yes, does have seed investors, Series A investors, Series B investors, and operates like a private company. So in the long run, all of this stuff will be good for the price action on XRP, but potentially not through the end of the year. And I get it. Listen, people are going to call me a bear. They're going to call me an idiot, but I've been talking about this for quite some time now. Now, one of the most bullish things that I can see happening in the future for the XRPL is if a lot of those transactions for their stablecoin, the RLUSD, move on chain, which would drive more demand for the XRP token to move that RLUSD. But this would require a lot of transactions in the RLUSD stablecoin, and right now they are growing. They hit another $1 billion market cap just the other day and have grown that fast in about a year. So I believe they're going to continue to grow and probably even quadruple this next year because of their key acquisition of Hidden Road. But if you haven't already recognized it, stablecoins are arguably one of the most crucial developments in blockchain history. And at the end of the day, many cryptos are going to end up doing nothing and go to zero, while stablecoin market will continue to grow because they will be the largest buyers of US treasuries. In other words, they are going to get support from the United States government, and everyone around the world wants US dollars, so they can get them in the form of digital US dollars made stable coins, which is why Ripple was really smart to develop their own, acquire all these companies, and hopefully start integrating that stablecoin in all of their payments globally. These are a lot of acquisitions, and yes, the RLUSD stablecoin is going to continue to grow, which will be settled on the XRP ledger. And so another really cool development is the fact that they're partnering with MasterCard and Gemini in order to use that Gemini XRP credit card, which will give you some cash back, I think, in the form of XRP. And so key partnerships like this will continue to grow adoption and demand for either the RLUSD stablecoin and XRP, which will live on the ledger. But at the end of the day, again, we want to see this work its way into the price of XRP, and all we've seen right now is dumping, which again leads me to believe that there's far more weakness and not enough demand. When you combine that with the fact that crypto market leverage is still through the roof, that does not create for a healthy environment. We've now set a new record of $73.6 billion in crypto loans, which can be liquidated in the case of another major bearish event or a black swan, which surpassed the previous record of $69.4 billion in Q4 of 2021. And guess what? That is when the crypto market crashed into a bear market of 2022. In other words, even with that mass liquidation event, we still have a ton of leverage on the loan side, which means things can get nastier before they get better. And we're already starting to see the cracks in the market, which I will cover. And if you've been a student of mine or watching these videos for some time, I believe the chart tells us the story before the news does. Usually by the time everyone's crying bear market, we're deep into one. Peter Brandt did call the exact exact cycle top essentially for Bitcoin, which led its way into the XRP market. And all cryptos essentially are tied pretty closely to the stock market. So if we see the stock market doing poorly, it's likely that risk on asset classes like crypto, which are more volatile, are going to do poorly as well. And Peter Brandt just made a post that is kind of scary. It says 4 signs the high is in for the S&P 500 for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, we don't really know if it's going to last that long. I don't think it will for crypto because we're going to see a lot of adoption over the next coming years. Either way, he did post about this exhaustion gap, about a gravestone doji candle, the fact that we are now getting a signal on the Hindenburg Omen signal, which is typical of tops. And he said you can read more on it right here. The fact that not only did he call the exhaustion gap, but it's been filled for 6 days of lower highs, and we're getting a macro backdrop that is arguably worsening. And so with all of these key signals, I do think it's important to just be a bit more cautious than normal. If this really was the top, and I'm starting to believe it is, then this was one of the weakest bull markets in crypto history. And I would argue it is because institutions have entered. Usually people were saying when institutions enter, and then we get an altcoin cycle, Bitcoin dominance drops, and everyone's going to be rich, but that's just not the case. We have to remember institutions can make money on the upside. They can also make money on the downside. So this market just becomes more difficult as more savvy investors enter with far more capital. So now let's dive into the price action as well as a few other metrics to see if we can get a better picture of what's going to happen next. Again, we have to remember that the news should actually be a signal, but it doesn't always tell you what you are actually reading. You need to test that against the price action. If the price action is very weak while the news is very positive, that simply means that the news is not pricing itself in or has already been priced in. So the price action you see right now in a positive news cycle leads me to believe that we are done trending to the upside for quite a while. That doesn't mean that these developments on the Ripple side or the team over at Ripple can eventually make a lot of those developments or acquisitions play a role in the XRP token. It simply means that right now the XRP token has priced in that news, and we're already looking bearish with the all-time high coming in here at about 366. Since that point in time, and we've covered this quite a bit here, we put in a series of lows at about $2.73 to 70 cents, which acted as a pretty strong support. Then we had a series of lower highs where we first got our lower low, we could even argue right here, which is lower than the prior low, and our next high, which is lower than this high. So you can see we have a series of what? Lower lows and lower highs for a downtrend, which leads me to believe we're going to continue trending to the downside. And now it looks like XRP is struggling to break back above 234, which is a range now resistance. What used to be a support or should have been a support becomes a resistance. You can see we touched it once here, twice, 3 times, 4 times before breaking out. Then we were supported once and twice, and now we are breaking down below the range and struggling to stay above it. Leads me to believe again we're likely coming back down to another range support right over here at 207, and this will be the final straw that potentially breaks the camel's back before breaking lower to about 160 yet again. In other words, if you're someone that's just an XRP investor, you want to hold over the long term, understand that you are likely carrying more risk the larger your position is. But if you think 10 years from now it's going to be $5, $10, $100, then buying dips into these ranges is smarter than adding right here. That said, I'm no longer adding a risk to my portfolio. I'm not buying dips, I'm actually shorting into rips. And that's not because I want to hate on XRP or anything. It's just that's what the trend is telling me. And again, the trend is my friend. I'm simply trying to be on the right side of the market. I'm not trying to be right. Even right now, Bitcoin is struggling to break back into its range. Yes, it's seeing a support around $101,000, but now it has a lot of overhead resistance to break back above between 106 to 107. So the only time I'd want to start to take long positions on XRP or start to buy some of these cryptos is into strength. If Bitcoin can get back above $107,000 and hold it for at least a week, then I'd be more inclined to buy other cryptos like XRP. But if Bitcoin starts to break below 101, which right now it is in now officially a shorter term downtrend from that high on October 6th, then things can get pretty nasty for the rest of the crypto market. But you can even see here, Bitcoin is now below its prior range support. So what used to be a support now becomes a resistance. This 107 level is going to be a major resistance, and Bitcoin truly needs to hold the line here in order for XRP to do well. Not only that, but we are officially seeing way more outflows than inflows. On the week of October 12th, we saw 1.2 billion outflows in Bitcoin. And then just this last week, we saw another $800 million in outflows on Bitcoin across all ETFs. In other words, people are not currently buying through the ETFs, they're selling their Bitcoin through those ETFs. Now, typically that wouldn't worry me. The problem is we have officially made a new trend to the downside, and Bitcoin is also going to struggle to get back above 107 and hold the range for at least a week. And so when I zoom out on something like XRP, you can see that right here between 207 down to 190 on the low. Let me go ahead and get rid of that line. This would be our large or longer term range support, and right now we are in a downtrend. So again, I think we have another opportunity to dip back down to 207 to even 190, and if we break below there, it is a long way down before we get another range support, which would probably come in somewhere between 122 down to 96 cents. And I don't think that'll happen in a single week, but it is very much possible when we already saw a very illiquid XRP on many exchanges dump 54% in one liquidation event. What happens in the case of a prolonged bear market? Right now, things aren't looking too good for the crypto market. And so again, for me, I just got to practice caution. I'm not giving you any financial advice. I'm not even telling you to sell your bag. Think about your long-term outlook. If you're a crypto investor, you want to invest in the long term, you want to take advantage of an IRA or Roth IRA, then buying into these ranges is actually quite smart. Adding to your position at $2 is smart. Adding at 128 is smart, because you believe 5 years from now it's going to be far more expensive. But if you're more of a trader, or you're thinking like, hey, I really need this capital and I need to put it to work within the next year, then maybe not adding to risk or waiting for some major dumps before buying would be a good idea. Heck, if you know how to trade a little, shorting into a breakdown or even selling the rip wouldn't be a bad idea either. But there's a lot of ways to make money in the market. There are far more though in which you could lose your money. So just be cautious right now. Really practice good risk management, because even day traders right now are leaning heavily short. You can see that this is the liquidation map on Bitcoin. We will cover it for XRP across many exchanges. This is CoinGlass data, pretty solid data. On the left hand side, you see the cumulative long liquidations all the way down to 91,000 would be 3.85 billion, while on the short side we have 8.37 billion. In other words, we have like 2.5 times more shorts piled in. People are short the market heavily. And so I found that this tends to actually be the direction in which the market goes before bouncing yet again. If I go ahead and look at XRP, same time frame, 7 days, and I just remove all of, Binance, OKX, Bybit, you can see that more people are short to the tune of 262 million versus long to the tune of 183. I think the bears are currently in control. And again, that's showing up in the price. You can see right here, we have a pretty nasty bearish candle with a new low. So we have a series of lower lows, lower highs, leads me to believe we're coming right back down to 207, if not 190 at some point in time in the next week, 2 weeks. So if you're a dip buyer, buying a support right down here for a little move to the upside back up to 225 wouldn't be a bad play, but understand it can break down heavily. So maybe having a really good stop loss in place would be important. And so that is it for the video, folks. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check out altcoinpro.com. And in 15 minutes, once per week, you can apply anything you get access to on the other side and make not only more than you would pay for monthly, but truly make the most out of this crypto market and hit your crypto goals, whether it's to be a crypto millionaire, understand the industry better, put your crypto to work for you in terms of some of these DeFi yields, which again, 15 minutes once per week is all you would need. Or heck, even taking advantage of an altcoin pick, hopping on my technical analysis Tuesday calls where I really dive into the technicals and the charts and show you everything you need to learn in order to be a pro and an expert and have confidence when pulling up TradingView and much more. So if you want to check it out, go to altcoinpro.com. You can find the link in the description of the bio below. Thanks so much for watching this video, my friend. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you next time. Goodbye.